The woman standing in the doorway of that banquet hall was not supposed to be there. Nobody had invited her. Nobody had called her name. But there she was, tall, composed, wearing a deep burgundy dress that moved like water when she walked, and the entire room went quiet in a way that rooms only go quiet when something has shifted that cannot be unshifted. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Because to understand what happened that evening in Mississauga, you have to go back. You have to go back to a Tuesday morning in February, when a woman named Obia Geely, everyone called her Obi, was standing in the parking lot of a Walmart on Hurontario Street, trying very hard not to cry. She was 31 years old. She had a degree in nursing from the University of Nigeria, in Nsukka, and a second certificate she had spent 3 years earning again here in Canada because the first one was not recognized. She had 2 jobs, a night shift at a long-term care facility in Brampton and a weekend position at a pharmacy that paid slightly above minimum wage. She sent money home every month, not sometimes, every month, and she did all of this without complaint, because that is what you do when your mother is sick and your younger sister is still in school and you are the one who made it abroad. She was not looking for love. That is the honest truth. She was not on any app. She was not going to any church socials. She was not asking anyone to set her up. She was tired. A good tired. The kind that comes from building something real, but tired nonetheless. Fitzgerald came into her life the way inconvenient things often do, without warning and at the worst possible time. He was at the pharmacy. He was trying to ask the pharmacist about a prescription for his grandmother, and the pharmacist, who was lovely but spoke very quickly, had lost him somewhere around the word contraindication. Obi was passing by and she stopped. She explained it. She drew a small diagram on the back of a receipt. She made it make sense. He said, "You're a nurse?" She said, "Close enough." He laughed. She did not expect the laugh. It was genuine, the kind that comes out before a person decides whether they want to laugh or not. His name was Fitzgerald Adeafa. "Fitz," he said. "Everyone calls me Fitz." He was 34. He had come from Lagos via London. He worked as a project manager for a construction firm in Etobicoke, and he had been in Canada for 6 years. His grandmother, Mrs. Adeafa, lived with him. A fact he mentioned in that first conversation, not as an apology but as information, the way a man who is serious about what he is does. They talked for 22 minutes in that pharmacy. Obi only knew that because her shift was supposed to start in 23. He asked if he could call her. She gave him her number. She did not expect him to actually call. He called that same evening. Now, and this is important, before we go any further, you need to understand something about Mrs. Adeafa. Her name was Constance. She had grown up in a neighborhood in Lagos, where the line between who you were and what your family owned was very thin, and she had spent 74 years reinforcing that line. She loved her grandson, genuinely. But she loved him the way some people love things, as possessions, as extensions of themselves, as reflections of what they had built. She had a particular idea of who Fitzgerald should marry. The woman in her head had a father who was a doctor or a senator. She had a mother who organized charity events. She had an apartment in Victoria Island before she immigrated, not a rented room in Mississauga, shared with a cousin. She definitely had not spent her first 3 years in Canada recertifying qualifications she already had. Obi was not that woman. The first time Obi came to dinner at Fitz's house, a semi-detached in Brampton that he owned, which surprised her pleasantly, Mrs. Adeafa was polite, the way marble is polite. Smooth, impenetrable, cold to the touch. She asked Obi what her father did back home. Obi said her father had passed. Mrs. Adeafa said she was sorry, but her eyes said she was cataloging information. She asked which part of Anambra Obi was from. Obi told her. Adeafa said, Ah, the way people say ah when they mean something else entirely. After dinner, when Obi was helping clear the table, Mrs. Adefa took her glass of water and walked to the living room without a word, leaving Obi standing in the kitchen alone. Fitz did not see, or he saw, and did not know what to do with what he saw. Obi was not sure which was worse. She said nothing on the drive home. He thought she was tired. She let him think that. Here is what nobody tells you about falling in love when you are a woman who has been holding herself together for a long time. You are very good at carrying things quietly. You have been trained for it, by circumstance, by necessity, by the fact that you cannot afford to fall apart because too many people need you intact. So you put the small humiliations in a pocket somewhere inside yourself, and you keep walking. Obi kept walking. 6 months in, Fitz asked her to marry him. He did it in a very Fitz way. No restaurant, no audience, no elaborate setup. He was driving her home after a Sunday morning spent at a farmer's market in Streetsville, and he pulled over on a side street, and he turned off the engine, and he said, "I want to marry you. I've known that for a while, but I needed to be sure you knew I was serious before I asked." Obi looked at him for a long time. She said, "Your grandmother will not accept this." He said, "I'm not marrying my grandmother." She said, "Fitz." He said, "Obi, I know, I see it, and I'm telling you that you are who I choose every time, without condition." She said yes. She said it quietly, but she said it. And now, if you are watching from home and you have ever been the person someone chose over their family's doubts, drop a heart in the comments, because this next part is for you. Mrs. Adefa found out the same evening. Fitz told her directly, gently, but without ambiguity. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, and he said, "Grandma, I have asked Obi to marry me, and she has said yes. I am telling you now because I love you, and I want you to be part of this." Mrs. Adefa put down her cup. She looked at her grandson. She said, "That girl has nothing, Fitzgerald." He said, "She has everything I want." She said, "You do not understand what you are doing." He said, "I understand completely." What happened after that was not a single explosion. It was a slow erosion. The kind that happens over months, that wears the surface down gradually, that you barely notice until suddenly there is a hole where solid ground used to be. Mrs. Adefa called her daughter in London. That was Fitz's Auntie Rosaline, a woman who had opinions the way some people have furniture. Too many, arranged to impress, never actually comfortable. Rosaline called Fitz and spent 40 minutes explaining that the Adefa name carried expectations, that his grandfather had built something, that he was not just choosing a wife, he was choosing what his children would be. Fitz listened. He said, "I hear you." He did not change his mind. Rosaline called Obi. This is the part nobody prepares you for. The call did not come as hostility. It came as concern. Rosaline had a warm voice, measured, almost maternal, and she said she was calling because she cared about Obi's happiness. She said, "A woman like you, hard-working, ambitious, you deserve a man who is free to love you. Fitzgerald is not free, my dear. His loyalty will always be divided." Obi said, "Thank you for calling." She hung up. She sat on her bed for a very long time. Then she called her best friend. Her best friend's name was Adisa. Now, Adisa deserves her own story, frankly, but we are here to tell Obi's, so we will keep it to what matters. Adisa had grown up 2 streets away from Obi in Onitsha. They had been friends since they were 9 years old. They had shared textbooks and secrets, and once, the only umbrella between them on a walk to school in heavy rain. Adisa had immigrated to Canada 5 years before Obi did. She had helped Obi find her first apartment, helped her study for her recertification exams, helped her laugh on the nights when Obi had almost decided that all of this, the cold, the starting over, the distance from home, was not worth it. Then Adisa had gotten a job offer in Ottawa, a serious one. working with a federal ministry on a policy portfolio that she could not have imagined getting so quickly. She had moved. Life had happened. They texted. Sometimes they called. Not as often as before. The way friendships go when two people are both running very fast in directions that don't always overlap. Obi told Adisa everything. The dinner with Mrs. Adeefa and the cold marble politeness. The call from Roseline. The way Fitz kept saying the right things, but the air in his grandmother's house kept getting heavier. Adisa said, "He's still choosing you?" Obi said, "Yes." Adisa said, "Then stay in it." She paused. Then she said, "And Obi, don't let them make you small. Don't let them do that to you. You hear me?" Obi heard her. The wedding was planned for a Saturday in October. Not a large wedding. Obi did not want that, and honestly could not have funded it, but a proper one. A venue in Mississauga. 60 guests. A caterer who did both Nigerian and Ghanaian food because Fitz's mother, who had remarried and now lived in Calgary, was Ghanaian. White and gold. Simple and real. Mrs. Adeefa told Fitz she would not attend. He said, "That is your choice to make. I hope you will reconsider," she said. "I am protecting you from a mistake," he said. "Grandma, you raised me to know my own mind. Please trust that." She said nothing, which in Mrs. Adeefa's language meant, "This is not over." 3 weeks before the wedding, something happened. Obi arrived at her building after a night shift, exhausted, smelling of the long-term care facility the way you do when you have been working for 12 hours, antiseptic and effort. There was a woman waiting in the lobby, not Mrs. Adeefa, younger, maybe 50, wearing a very good coat. She introduced herself as Mrs. Okonkwo. She said she was a family friend of the Adeefas. She said she had come to have a conversation. She did not ask if Obi had time. She had assumed it. Inside that conversation, which lasted 12 minutes, because Obi was very tired and very clear, Mrs. Okonkwo explained that the Adeefa family was prepared to help Obi. She said the word help the way people say it when they mean something that requires you to agree to stop doing what you are doing. She mentioned a sum of money, $50,000. She said it could go toward Obi's student loans, toward the money she sent home, toward whatever Obi needed. All she had to do was walk away. Obi looked at this woman in her very good coat and felt something cold settle over her. Not anger, not yet. Something older than anger. Something that comes from being Nigerian, from being a woman, from knowing exactly what this moment meant. They had looked at her life and decided it had a price tag. She said, "I would like you to leave." Mrs. Okonkwo said, "Think about." Obi said, "I would like you to leave now." She left. Obi did not tell Fitz that night. She was not sure why. Maybe she needed to sit with it alone first, to make sure it was real, to make sure she had not imagined it. She called Adisa. Adisa answered on the second ring even though it was past 11 and Adisa had work in the morning. Obi told her everything. There was silence on the other end. Then Adisa said, $50,000. Obi said yes. Adisa said, "They think $50,000 is what you're worth." Obi said yes. Adisa said, "Okay, just that. Okay." But in the way that meant she was writing something down, somewhere in her mind, filing it, holding on to it. The next day, Obi told Fitz. Fitz drove to his grandmother's house. Obi did not go with him. She waited. He came back 2 hours later. His face was very still, the way faces go still when a person has said things they cannot unsay. He sat down beside her and said, "I am so sorry," she said. "You didn't send her," he said. "She is my family, and that does not excuse what she did, and I am asking you if you still want to do this." She looked at him for a long time. She said, "I am not leaving because of her. But Fitz, I need you to understand what I have been carrying in that house every time I go there, every dinner, every question, I need you to see it." He said, "I see it. I am sorry I didn't see it sooner." She said, "Don't be sorry. Just don't look away from it anymore." He said, "I won't." They sat together for a while. Outside, a Canadian October was doing what it always does, slowly pulling the color from the trees, preparing the world for the long gray that was coming. It felt like the right weather for what they were sitting inside of. The wedding was 12 days away. Now, Mrs. Adefa was not finished, because people like Mrs. Adefa, and you know someone like this, don't you? Maybe not in your family, maybe in someone else's, but you know the type. They do not stop when the direct approach fails. They simply move sideways. She began making calls. She called people on the guest list. Not all of them. She was too careful for that. But the ones she knew. The ones who had known Fitz since he was small. She told them things. Half-truths arranged to look like facts. That OB was only marrying Fitz for the stability. That she had heard from someone reliable that OB was still sending money to a man back home. The implication left hanging in the air like smoke, meaning everything and nothing. That the family did not approve, and that a wedding without family blessing is a house built on sand. One of those calls landed with a man named Churchill. Churchill was Fitz's childhood friend from their Lagos days. A loud, well-meaning man who had been put on the guest list without anyone asking whether he was the kind of person who should receive sensitive information. Churchill told his wife. His wife told two people. By the week before the wedding, Obi had heard, through a third party, a version of a story about herself that she did not recognize. She sat with it. She thought about calling it off. Not because of what they were saying. She knew what was true, but because she was tired, because she had spent her whole life building herself back up after things tried to knock her down, and there was a part of her that simply wanted to rest. There was a part of her that asked, "Is this what the next 40 years looks like? Is this what I am signing up for?" She called Adisa. She said, "I'm thinking about calling it off." There was a long pause. Then Adisa said, "Because of what they're saying or because of what you actually feel?" Obi said, "I don't know anymore." Adisa said, "Yes, you do." Obi said nothing. Adisa said, "Do you love him?" Obi said, "Yes." Adisa said, "Does he love you?" Obi said, "Yes." Adisa said, "Then what they are doing is noise." Obi, "It is noise. And I need you to hear me when I tell you, don't let noise make your decisions for you." Obi breathed in. Adisa said, "Also, I need you to handle something for me." Obi said, "What?" Adisa said, "Make sure there's a parking space for me. I drive now." And that was the moment. Because Adisa had not confirmed she was coming. They had not talked about it. Ottawa was 4.5 hours away, and Adisa's schedule was impossible. Obi had not even expected her to come, had mentally filed the wedding under the category of things she would experience mostly alone, the way she had experienced most of the hard things here. She said, "Adisa." Adisa said, "Parking space. Handle it. Good night." The morning of the wedding, it rained, not a little. It rained the way Ontario rains in October when it has decided to mean it, heavy and sideways. The kind that finds the gap between your collar and your neck, no matter what you do. Obi stood at the window of the room they had rented for her to get ready in and looked at the parking lot and thought, of course, her mother was not there. She was in Onitsha, too ill to travel, watching through a video call propped up against a water bottle by Obi's cousin. Her sister was there, Chidinma, 22, who had flown in from Lagos and could not stop touching everything in the room, like a person who has never been inside a Canadian building, which she hadn't. Chidinma kept saying, "Sis, this is so fine," and somehow it helped. The makeup artist arrived. The flowers arrived. The photographer arrived early and was very enthusiastic about the rain in the way that photographers are enthusiastic about everything, calling it moody and cinematic. At 10:45, Fitz texted, "I'm here. Everything is ready. I love you. Come." She smiled. She put the phone down. At 11:15, Obi's maid of honor, a colleague from the long-term care facility named Precious, knocked and said, "There is someone outside who says she is a family friend of the groom. She is asking to speak to the bride before the ceremony." Obi felt the familiar cold again. She said, "Tell her I am not available." Precious said, "She says it is urgent." Obi said, "Tell her I am not available." She turned back to the mirror. She looked at herself, at the ivory dress, at the small gold earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, at the face of a woman who had worked very hard to be in this room on this day, and she made a decision that some people would call stubbornness and other people would call dignity. She was walking into that ceremony. Whatever was coming could come after. The ceremony was in the main hall. 60 people, white and gold. The caterer had set up a display near the entrance that smelled like jollof and fried plantain and entirely undid the occasion's formal atmosphere in the best possible way. Fitz was standing at the front in a navy suit with a small piece of gold kente at his pocket. Obi had insisted on that, had argued for it, had said a man should not erase where he comes from on the day he is building where he is going. He looked at her when she walked in, and his face did a thing that faces do when everything a person has been feeling finally has somewhere to land. The officiant began. It was at the exchange of vows, right in the middle of Obi saying, "I choose you," in every season, "I choose you," that the door opened. It was not loud. That was the thing. No one burst in, no one shouted, no one made a scene the way scenes are made in films. The door simply opened, and 3 people walked in. A man and a woman who were clearly some kind of security, in dark coats, standing at the back with the practiced stillness of people who do this professionally. And between them, behind them, walking as though she had all the time in the world, was a woman in a burgundy dress. She was perhaps 40. She had the particular posture of someone who has spent a long time in rooms where the stakes were very high and learned not to let the room know what she was thinking. She looked around once, found Obi at the altar, and smiled. The specific small smile of someone you have not seen in a long time but have thought about, because it was Adisa. Not the Adisa who shared an umbrella with her in Onitsha in the rain. Not exactly. This was Adisa, who had spent 5 years in Ottawa, working her way from policy advisor to senior director of a federal ministry. The kind of position that, in Canada, comes with a title, a security detail when traveling, and a name that had started appearing in newspapers. The room did not know any of this, but Mrs. Adaifa, who was not supposed to be there, who had said she was not coming, and had then apparently decided that some things required her presence, was sitting in the very last row, the only person who had walked in before Adisa, and when Adisa entered, Mrs. Adaifa went very still. Because Adisa was not a surprise to her. They had met once, at an event in Toronto 2 years ago, and at that event, Mrs. Adaifa had been very warm and very gracious to the young senior director from the ministry. She had not known then that the senior director was Obi's best friend. She had not connected those 2 facts together. She was connecting them now. Adisa walked to the 4th row and sat down. Her security remained at the back. She looked at the officiant and nodded once, a polite nod, the kind that says, "Please continue. I'm so sorry for the interruption." The officiant, to his enormous credit, continued. Obi stood at that altar and finished her vows. She said every word she had planned to say, every word she had written in the back of a notebook, at 2 in the morning after a night shift, exhausted and hopeful and terrified and sure. She said them clearly. She said them looking at Fitz, who was looking at her like she was the only fixed point in the room. And then they were married, and then, and only then, the room exhaled. The reception was in the adjoining space. At some point during the first hour, Obi saw Adisa make her way to where Mrs. Adaifa was seated, because of course Mrs. Adaifa had stayed. Because people like Mrs. Adaifa never leave a scene they have invested in. She watched Adisa sit down next to the old woman. She could not hear what was said. She did not need to. She found out later. Adisa told her 3 weeks after, over the phone, matter-of-factly, the way Adisa told everything. She had sat down next to Mrs. Adefa, and she had said, very quietly, "Mrs. Adefa, I know what you sent to Obi's building 3 weeks ago. I know about Mrs. Okonkwo. I know about the phone calls." Mrs. Adefa had said nothing. Adisa had said, "Obi has never told you who I am. She would not do that. She is not that kind of woman. But I am telling you now, so that we understand each other." She paused. "What you tried to do was wrong. Not because of what I do for work. It was wrong because that woman up there is one of the finest people I have ever known. And whatever you think she is missing, whatever you think puts her below your family, you are incorrect. And I think somewhere in you, you already know that." Another pause. "She is your family now. I would encourage you to act like it." Mrs. Adefa had looked at Adisa for a long time. Then she had looked at the dance floor, where Fitz and Obi were doing their first dance badly. Fitz had 2 left feet. Obi was laughing at him for it. And something in her face had shifted. Not collapsed, not dissolved, but shifted. Like something that had been held very tightly for a very long time had been given, just slightly, permission to loosen. She did not apologize that evening. That would come later, months later, in a conversation that Obi would not share with anyone except Fitz, and even then, not in detail because some things belong to the people they happen to. But she stayed for the whole reception. She watched her grandson dance badly with his wife. She ate the jollof, which was very good. At some point in the evening, she caught Obi's eye from across the room and gave a small nod. Obi nodded back. At the end of the night, Adisa found Obi near the exit, both of them in the warm, shapeless exhaustion that comes after a very long, very full day. Obi's heels were in her hand. Adisa had lost her burgundy wrap somewhere and did not seem bothered. Obi said, "You drove 4.5 hours. Adisa said, 4 hours, 40 minutes. GPS was right for once. Obi said, "You didn't tell me you were coming until the last minute." Adisa said, "I wasn't sure about the parking situation." Obi laughed, a real one, the kind that starts in the belly. Then she said, quieter, "About the ministry, about all of it. I didn't even know how far you'd gone." Adisa's was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because when I talk to you, I don't want to be that. I just want to be Adisa, the one you called when the pharmacist talked too fast." Obi looked at her. "That was Fitz." Adisa said, "I know. I've heard the story 400 times. I'm in the story now. Let me be in it." Outside, the October rain had stopped. The parking lot was wet and reflecting the venue's lights in broken orange pieces across the asphalt. The air had that clean, specific smell of after rain in a Canadian autumn, cold and real and strangely hopeful. Obi stood there for a moment, heels in hand, dress catching the wind, and thought about the Tuesday in February when she had been standing in a Walmart parking lot, trying not to cry. She thought about the pocket inside herself, where she had been storing the small humiliations, the cold marble dinners, the visit in the lobby from a woman in a good coat. She thought about what Adisa had said. "Don't let them make you small," she thought. They didn't. And then she went back inside, because Fitz's mother from Calgary had taken over the sound system and was playing something with a beat that demanded you participate. And 60 people were making noise in the way that people make noise when something real has been celebrated, and the night is not quite ready to end. And if you have a friend like Adisa, someone who shows up without announcement, who holds what you've told them carefully, who drives 4 hours and 40 minutes in the rain because you ask them to handle the parking, then you already know what I'm going to say next. Keep them. Whatever it costs. Keep them. Subscribe to Urban African Folktales for a new story every week, and tell me in the comments, Has a friend ever shown up for you in a way you didn't expect? I want to read every single one.